In tonight's episode, we head into the misty highlands of Baguio, where a quiet government retreat has become the stage for one of the Philippines' most chilling ghost stories. This place was built during the American era. It still hosts seminars and school trainings, but ask around, and you'll hear a different kind of lesson being passed down, one that comes with whispers. And a woman in white. This story takes place in a place called Teacher's Camp. The name sounds harmless until midnight hits. That's when she appears, alone, spinning, dancing, moving to a melody only she can hear. Locals have a name for her, but no one knows who she really was. All they know is, if you see her, don't watch for too long. She doesn't like an audience. Our story follows Irene, a 27-year-old public school teacher from Manila. Burnt out from a long semester and newly assigned to a regional leadership program, she wasn't exactly thrilled about spending an entire week away from home. The email said the seminar would be held in the mountains. Cooler air, fewer distractions, perfect for focus. What it didn't say was that she'd be staying in one of the oldest lodging facilities still in use in the Philippines. Teacher's Camp. The bus dropped them off just before dusk. Irene stepped onto cracked pavement surrounded by looming pine trees and pale colonial buildings, their wooden sidings faded grey with age. Her assigned room was in the Harrison Barracks, a squat, two-story structure that smelled like old paper and liniment. The floors creaked, even when she stood still. The windows rattled gently, even when there was no wind. Still, she didn't complain. Everyone else seemed too tired to care, dragging their suitcases inside while the coordinators handed out welcome kits. Irene took hers, smiled politely, and found her room at the far end of the corridor. It had one bed, one small desk, and a window that faced the forest. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then, somewhere in the distance, music. Faint, just a few soft piano notes, then silence. She paused, unsure if she'd really heard it. Probably someone testing the audio setup for tomorrow. She let it go. That night, the first seminar ended just after 9. Irene went to bed early, too exhausted to notice the temperature dropping sharply inside her room. She wrapped herself in a blanket, turned off the light, and stared at the dark ceiling above her. The silence was deep, the kind that makes your ears ring. Until it wasn't. At exactly 12:47, Irene sat up in bed. Not because of a nightmare, not because of a sound, but because she suddenly felt like she wasn't alone. She looked toward the window. Nothing. Just pine trees. Still. And then, she heard it. Again. A melody coming from somewhere inside the building. Soft. Slow. Like a music box turning underwater. She waited for it to stop. It didn't. The next morning, Irene mentioned the music in passing, half laughing about it over powdered coffee in the mess hall. "You heard that too?" one of the other teachers asked, a woman from Quezon City with tired eyes and a tight bun. She stirred her cup a little slower than before. "What time was it?" "Almost 1, I think," Irene replied. The woman didn't answer. She just nodded slowly, then changed the subject. Later that afternoon, while the group was on a short break, Irene wandered off to find a quiet spot to call her sister. Reception was weak inside the building, so she followed a narrow concrete path around the side of the barracks, toward a small pavilion surrounded by pine needles. That's when she noticed something odd. Across the open courtyard, behind a row of grimy windows, someone was moving inside the mess hall. A woman? Alone. She was gliding, there was no other word for it, across the room with long practiced turns. Her white dress trailed behind her like mist. At first, Irene thought it was another staff member sweeping or preparing the tables for dinner, but something felt off. The way she moved, the rhythm. It was too graceful, too precise. And then Irene realized something else. There was no music. She blinked, looked again. The woman turned in place, arms extended like a ballerina mid-pose, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then, just as suddenly, she stopped and looked directly at Irene. From across the courtyard, through the glass, Irene stepped back instinctively, her heart jumping. But the woman didn't move. She just stood there, watching. Her face was too far away to see clearly, but something about the posture, rigid, expectant, made Irene's stomach twist. She turned away and hurried back toward the main building. That night, Irene tried to shake it off. Maybe it had been another teacher playing a prank. Maybe it was nothing. But when she returned to her room later that evening, she found something sitting just inside the door. A small broken comb. Old, cracked, ivory-colored, and ice cold to the touch. The next morning, Irene brought the comb to the front desk, assuming someone might have dropped it or left it behind in the room. The staff member behind the counter barely glanced at it. "You should throw that away," he said, without looking up. "Is it from the lost and found or something?" "No," he answered too quickly. "Just don't keep it. Some things here aren't meant to be picked up." Before she could ask what he meant, another staff member appeared from the back room. An older woman, thin as a rake, eyes sharp despite her gentle smile. She looked at the comb in Irene's hand and immediately frowned. "Where did you find that?" she asked quietly. "In my room. It was just sitting by the door." The woman reached across the counter and took it, wrapping it in a red cloth she pulled from her pocket. Her movements were careful, deliberate. "She's started early this week," the woman muttered. Irene blinked. "Who?" But the older woman just turned away and walked off. That night, after the last workshop ended, Irene took a different route back to her room. The sun had set behind the trees and the air had turned sharp, almost metallic in the lungs. As she passed by the same mess hall from the day before, she paused. No lights, no sound, just a still, dark rectangle of glass. Until movement flickered. A pale shape darted across the far end of the room, barely visible in the dimness. This time, it wasn't dancing. It was pacing. Irene moved faster, trying not to look back. Inside her room, she locked the door, shut the curtains, double-checked everything. But just after midnight, she woke again. Same time, same feeling. The kind that pulls your consciousness up like a string. She lay frozen, eyes wide, when the music began. Only this time, it was coming from inside the room. A tinny, music box version of some old ballroom tune, echoing faintly from the small speaker on her desk. She hadn't touched the speaker since she arrived. Irene sat up slowly. The music stopped. Then came the cold, not from the window, from behind her. She turned around. The chair in the corner, empty just moments ago, was now turned to face her bed. The blanket she'd folded over it was on the floor. Irene didn't scream. She didn't move. She just sat there, breathing shallow, heart hammering, until the sun began to rise. The next morning, she went to breakfast looking pale, eyes sunken. She found the woman with the bun, the one who'd nodded when she mentioned the music. "I think someone's coming into my room," Irene whispered. The woman looked at her plate, then leaned in. "Did she leave anything else?" "No," Irene said. "Just the comb." The woman looked up slowly. "Then she's not done yet. Then she's..." By the fourth night, Irene was no longer sleeping. She kept the lights on, rearranged the furniture, even tried playing white noise on her phone, anything to drown out the sensation that something was watching her from the corner of the room. But it didn't matter. Every night, at the same time, she would wake up, and something would be different. One night, it was her suitcase. Unzipped, contents half pulled out like someone had been looking through it. Another time, the bathroom mirror fogged over, though she hadn't used any hot water. But this night was different. Just after midnight, there was a knock on her door. 3 slow taps, then silence. She froze. Checked the time, 12:47. Another knock. But when she crept to the peephole, heart pounding, there was no one there. Only the hallway, empty, still. She locked the door again, backed away, only to hear something else. Music. Not from her room this time. From down the hallway. She opened the door a crack and saw her, a woman in a long, flowing white gown. back turned, moving in slow, graceful steps down the corridor, arms lifting gently as if twirling to a rhythm only she could hear. The air was freezing. Irene's breath fogged as she watched. Then the woman stopped. Not because she was done dancing, but because she had noticed the door and began to turn. Irene slammed the door shut and backed away. That's when she smelled it burning, not fire, incense. She opened the window, coughing slightly, and looked outside. A group of staff members stood in a small circle below, burning something in a clay pot and chanting in low, hurried voices. One of them glanced up, met her eyes, and without missing a beat, pointed at her window, then lit another stick. At dawn, Irene didn't wait for breakfast. She packed her things and made her way straight to the front desk. The older woman was already there, as if she'd been expecting her. "I want to move rooms," Irene said. "Or leave, please." The woman didn't argue. She just nodded and motioned for Irene to sit. Then she placed something on the counter between them. A second comb, identical to the one Irene had found earlier, cracked, ivory-colored, ice-cold. "She leaves them for women who remind her of herself," the woman said quietly. "She was a dancer, used to perform for the American soldiers. They say she fell in love with one of them. He promised to take her back to the States, but he left without her." Irene stared at the comb. Her throat felt tight. They found her body in the mess hall. Years later, she wore her best gown and had the radio playing. Irene shook her head. "But that was decades ago. Why is she still here?" The woman sighed. "Because she never stopped waiting." The other staff had tried rituals over the years. Blessings, cleanings, even sealing off the old rehearsal room. Nothing worked for long. She wasn't violent, but she was persistent, especially during the rainy months, especially with women who stayed alone. "She's not trying to hurt you," the woman added. "She just wants someone to dance with her." Outside, the fog was already rolling in again, soft, heavy. The camp was quiet. Too quiet. Irene didn't say another word. She just took her bag, her keys, and checked out. Irene left that morning without saying goodbye to anyone. She didn't wait for the seminar to end, didn't ask for a refund. She booked the first bus back to Manila and sat near the front, gripping her bag like it might disappear if she let go. By the time the camp faded behind the trees, the sun had broken through the fog, but Irene didn't feel any warmer. Back in the city, she tried to return to normal life. Teaching, commuting, sleeping with the lights off, but it never really went back to normal. Because a week later, she found something strange in her laundry basket. A white dress sock that wasn't hers. Delicate fabric, slightly damp, and tucked inside it, wrapped in tissue, was a third comb. Ivory, old, the crack running straight down the middle. She hadn't brought anything back from Baguio. At least, she didn't think she had. No, sometimes at night, when everything is quiet, she hears it again. Faint piano music playing from no source at all. It stops the moment she looks around. And once, just once, she swore she saw movement in the hallway mirror. A woman, spinning slowly, just out of frame. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video and want to listen to more true horror stories from Asia, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload at least 3 times a week. Wish you all the best.